Good morning. It's what a beautiful way to begin our day, right? Isn't that good? I trust that was, today we're wrapping up part 4 of a series we've called Everyday Ordinary, and we're looking, trying to honor the parts of our lives that a lot of us just want to get through in order to get somewhere else. Like if you can just get through this season of life, then the next season will be better. If you can just tend to these small things, then perhaps you'll get bigger things. And we're trying to avoid that way of thinking by honoring these moments, not to see them as something that perhaps we got to find God's purpose in. These are part of like what God wants us to do later on, but to see them as the opportunity for us to be faithful to Him in the moments, in the most mundane of moments, and to see them as a part of our formation, an important part of how we become the kind of people that God has created us to become. Most of our lives are lived, right, in these everyday, ordinary moments. The bigger things are often few and far between. And so we want to really address that and help. I want for us to understand that the things that you are dealing with in those moments aren't a means to an end. It's not to get through that in order to get somewhere else, but it's actually what our lives are comprised of. And so that's what we are doing. We've used this passage out of Galatians chapter 5, and the part of this, it says that if we, since we have crucified our flesh along with its passion and desires, let us live by the Spirit, and if we live by the Spirit, we'll walk with the Spirit. And that's what we're addressing or talking about in this. And we've arranged this series around the components that make up a week, which is pretty obvious. There's the beginning of the week, which we often think of as Monday. Well, it is the beginning of the week, but we've been talking about it. We started off 4 weeks ago as Sunday, where we wanted to take 20 minutes at the end of Sunday and to create our week. That was what we did. If you, this is your first time back in a while or first time here, this was part 1 of the series. You have to go back and listen. But we had this vision of creating our week. And then we have Monday, then we sort of took Wednesday, and this was the midweek connection. This is like those middle places that don't seem to matter, where the tendency is if I can just get through this, then I'll get on to other things. I mean, it's really embracing those middle moment places and the importance of those to reconnect. Then the weekend, we kind of ruined everybody's weekend by talking about confession. It was midweek connections, weekend confession. So the idea is you confess before you do all the things in the weekend. You get yourself, I'm just kidding. But that was the idea. So as we're trying to break this into a cycle. And now we're back to Sunday again, and today we're going to begin again. We're going to begin again. If we live by the Spirit, let us walk in the Spirit. Let us keep in step with the Spirit. It's this idea that we'll find God's presence and His direction and His presence in the everyday, ordinary moments of our lives. Galatians chapter 5, verse 24, that same passage from the Message translation reads like this. Those who, since this is the kind of life that we have chosen, the life of the Spirit, let us make sure that we do not just hold it as an idea in our heads or a sentiment in our hearts, but work out its implications in every detail of our lives. This is a really important thing for us because a lot of us, our faith is a series of ideas, things we nod our head at, things we say amen to, things we retweet or post. There are things that we would say, oh yeah, I believe that, or I trust that, or I think that, or I agree with that. But then to work those things out into the nitty-gritty parts of our lives, how you live at work and how you live at home and how you are with your spouse and how you are with your kids and how you are in your dating relationships and how you are with your money and all the implications of what this way of life under the rule of God's love would hold for us, would be for us in there. And so that's what I want for us to do together. We've created this sort of arc, this way of thinking about things. And today I want to talk about beginning again. When I think about beginning again, y'all know how much I like to play golf. And so I've played a few years ago, probably about 20 years ago, I almost got good at golf. And that's where you can tell you're about to start spending a lot of money on this. And so I was like, I can't do this. But so I play like once every 4 years, and I play with my brothers, my dad sometimes. And so whenever we go, I always ask them how many. I need a lot of golf balls. And they always like, I'm like, no, I'm gonna need a lot because I lose a lot. And one of the great things about never hitting the ball where everybody else is you're always by yourself. So I'm up there, no one's ever around me, and I can hit a 7-iron. Like for whatever reason, my 7-iron, and it doesn't matter how far it is or how short it is, I'm hitting a 7-iron. because I can just hit it. It's like, I don't know, it's like 90 yards. So this is what most people hit, like their pitching wedge. I hit my 7-iron, but you get the idea. So I'll be up in the woods somewhere and up on this hill, and my brother's down there in the fairway, and I'll just take 4 golf balls and drop them down. And I just start whacking them, boom, and whichever one I like the best is which one I hit next. And in fact, one time I was out there, and man, I crushed one from the, whoom, Mark goes, dude, you hit that like it was on a tee. I was like, it was. I teed it up right there in the middle of the fairway. But I realized, so there is a thing in golf called a mulligan, right? And a mulligan, you can't do in the middle of the fairway. You can only do it on the tee shot. And a mulligan is basically where if you hit the first shot bad, you get to put the second shot and you pretend like the first one never happened. Well, the problem with beginning again where we are is you don't get a mulligan like that because you're in the fairway or somewhere else. You have all kinds of stuff that has already happened. This is why these rhythms of confession and repentance are so important, because it allows us to bring ourselves back to God and to say, here's where we are, and we begin again. And the reason I keep talking about this in this way, like we focus on redemption. Like part of the last 5, 7, 8 years, I've been talking about redemption, because we live in sort of a way where we demand solutions, right? If there was a problem, I'll solve it. We have this, I know every word of that song. We have this idea that if we can just figure out how to do something, we can solve it once and for all. And the economy that God brings, the way of life under the rule of his love, honors redemption. It means that it recognizes that we've done things and things have happened to us. It doesn't try to discount and pretend like none of this happens so you can begin again. It takes this new beginning and says whatever has happened is available now to become something more, something that we may not have yet expected. And this is why we have to have this vision, this mindset about this. We work this out in the everyday, the implications in our everyday, ordinary lives. What is the impact of the gospel, what God has done, what he wants to do on the way in which you live your actual life, the real life that you have in front of you with all the pressure, all the demands, all the frustrations, all the fears, all the things that go into that. And so today I want to add another rhythm into this. As we talk about connection with God, I think this is a daily thing, confession, repentance, which needs to be a rhythmic thing, regular thing. And then today I want to add the rhythm of gathering, of us getting together. And in this case, on Sunday morning, okay? Now, why would we do that? Well, everybody knows, because the church has to have large attendance in order to, right? That's why we do this. I'm just kidding. That's not why we do this. But this has been the assumption in churches, just because it's default. Like you have a church and your church is supposed to grow, and what your church growing means is that it gets bigger, and bigger means more people in its services. And I've done this for a long time. I still can't figure out why that's a thing. Like that's only people who care about that's other pastors. And you remember the very early days when our church started to grow. Roland Grice started to grow. I would get calls from people, and they would say, Mike, how did you get your church to grow? One is, I had no idea. But what I would always ask is this. I said, it's the wrong question. It's not how do you get people to come to your church? It's what do you want for them when they come? And as a staff, as a church, as a part of this church, like we have to know what we want for one another as we show up together. So the point of gathering is not to say, oh, we got to be together. If you don't come to church, you should feel guilty. That a lot of you grew up in traditions where that was the motive. If you didn't show up, you were supposed to feel guilty about it. We have lots of folks who watch online, and we're very grateful. A lot of people stay connected online. We have people who stay connected online in other parts of the country. So we're learning a lot of things about how this works. This is not any indictment or anything. It's just to say that there is something about being in a space and sharing space together. And it is important. We know we live in a culture where we do have the access to digital opportunities. We also live in a more transient culture that wasn't this way 5 or 6, 8 years ago. The number of people who will go and working from home has allowed a lot of flexibility for people. And those are all great things. But we have to find ways to make sure that we use this space to create a rhythm to being together, And that's the reason I want for us to, that's what we want for us as we show up and gather together, is we want for us to really feel a sense of togetherness. Lots of beautiful things happen when we feel and are together. This church, is important to me. And what I want to be able to do is I want to kind of raise the value of the local church by talking about this today. We're going to start this. Because the church isn't about getting bigger. The church actually, I believe, is the hope of the world. The things that the church offers and has the capacity to do are going to be so important for our city and for our region in the next 2, 3, 5 years. And it's going to require something from us. I really believe that, and I feel like our church is really being prepared for these things. And one of the things that happens, and you know this, whenever we start to develop, patterns of frustration or distance, we always sort of pull away. We often feel isolated, and to show up week in and week out is one way where that can kind of be dissipated. And when I was starting Port City, and a lot of things have happened to me, I'm very grateful for this church for a lot of reasons. My family has been immeasurably impacted by being a part of this church. I have 2 daughters. They're nearly grown, 27 and 21, almost 22. Son-in-law, and when our kids were young and we started in the church, it was nuts. It was crazy. Everything's wide open all the time. And I remember I didn't want to lead a church that my kids ended up hating, either because what it did to me or my wife or to them. And both of them attend here. Both of them love. All 3 of them, our son-in-law too, all 3 of them are involved here and love our church. And they have grown, and their walks are authentic and genuine. I would like to credit it to good preaching, but it really has more to do with the small group leaders. It's Grow Zone, Tsunami, Treasure Island, Tsunami, Ripple Effect, Overflow have invested immensely in the lives of my kids. And I'm grateful for that. Also for me personally, I have grown by being a part of this church. As a pastor, you feel a lot of pressure to toe the party line, to do what everybody expects you to do. And this church has afforded me a space to ask questions and to wrestle. And so when people are going through really, really difficult things, as inevitably happens in a church like this, we're able to enter in and not just offer spiritual platitudes, but really be helpful. And all that has led to a lot of my own sort of, developing personally, leadership-wise, theologically, all of those things. And as I look back, what I've noticed is it's not because I'm smart or it's because there's been incredible people around me. There's this sense of community that God has given to us, to me, and I think it's available to everybody if we're willing to enter in. And we're going to talk about how to do that in just a minute. But community isn't a tag onto your formation, like it's whipped cream. Like I'm being formed, and if I get community, that's like a bonus. Your formation won't fully happen without community. Without community. And I want to use this phrase very specifically, but the phrase I'm talking about community, I'm talking about people around you that you would consider trusted others. People that you trust. A lot of people have others around them, but you have trusted others around you, people who can speak into you. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. When I was kind of wrestling through this, and I've noticed this in a couple ways in my life, because this is the formative work that God has done in me as being a part of this body. Even like community, who is involved in our church, how people got involved, what kind of people could come, all the different things. Right, you're able to sort of justify positions based on certain convictions or standards or compliance. Well, you can be involved if you're this, and you sort of create these borders that say these are the people who can be involved and these are the people who can't be involved. And I know we can't imagine ever doing that to anybody, but we have this sense that we can with a good conscience exclude people from our purview if we just have the right reasons to do so. And I remember just, in my own sort of world and even raising my kids, my oldest daughter said, she said, Dad, it seems really funny that we try to draw borders to keep people out, and Jesus seems to put borders around on the other side of people to bring them in. And we're like, I could have done without that because I kind of like the borders that keep people out, right? It's like, well, how do you know? But you're always challenged, so you're shaped. You have to, what are the implications of this way of Jesus in my life, in the real way I do life? I had a philosophy that was biblically based, right? That valued personal responsibility. And if you just made good choices and did the right things, your life would turn out the way it should if you just did things right and well. And then you kind of sort of have a way, if you just pull yourself up your bootstraps, right? You have a real sort of capitalistic view of your spirituality. And it's like values personal responsibility. And you start reading the Bible and you start entering into other people's lives and spaces and listening and learning and recognizing this is a lot more complex than ever imagined. Because what it allowed me to do is it allowed me to read verses about the poor and sort of marginalize or compartmentalize it over here. Say, oh, that's them, but we got to do this. And the implications are what God has asked of his people. That's where we go. Last 3 years of my life, 3.5 years, have been a deep dive in understanding sort of poverty, the systemic issues in our culture that involve both race and socioeconomic issues in our community, trying to understand this, because what I want to know, if Jesus has called us to be in those places, then the church has to understand how we go into these places to be helpful, to bring hopeful, and to do this over a long period of time. And so this is just kind of where we're going. So it matters who we become. But these are things that I recognize, and the thing that makes me the most grateful for this church is I recognize is given the right set of circumstances, I could have spent my entire career keeping those at arm's length. I could have spent my entire career never having to really care about those things, except for the fact that something happens and we're formed into his image. We begin to find places in our hearts that need to be awakened to his heart. So this happens because of us. There are some significant hurdles simply because of where we live. No judgment, no indictment, just observation. We live in a culture that makes it difficult for us to do these things, the kind of things, and even what I'm going to talk about, what we're going to talk about sort of being together. Number one is we live in a culture that is very individualistic. I assume you know this. But most every problem or the way in which we assess the lives in which we live are almost always based on how this affects me and my tribe. It's just the water we swim in. Everything is tailored to your individual need. My own theological framework was like that, right? You have a personal relationship with Christ. You have a personal quiet time. And if I do that and you do that, good for us. But when that happens, we don't develop a sense of collectiveness, a sense of community and understanding how this actually happens together. So we have to ask and seek and knock and learn this together. And we also live in a culture that is just driven by consumerism. Did y'all know that? I mean, it's interesting. You know, there's an adage in the social media tech world that says if you don't pay for the product, you are the product. So it means if you got a free app, that's nice because they're selling you to everybody else. And because it's all consumer. And it's all of us. So we show up to everything and we assess its effectiveness by what it means to me. Even the church. Why we show up to the church go, well, hey man, I hope I get something out of this. And if I don't, I'll go find somewhere else to get this from because we're always, so these two things work against us. And it's gonna require some things from us that aren't exactly commonplace in our culture. So here's what I do. So in Galatians chapter 6, 5 and 6 actually, it's really interesting. We read the Bible a lot of times. We read the Bible and we grab these like, nuggets. Found a nugget, it's awesome. Underline it, rock it out. Post it online, whatever you do. So this, it's interesting because this is a letter in Galatians. And he says, since we live by the Spirit, let us keep in step with the Spirit, right? Since we live by the Spirit, let us keep in step with the Spirit. So there's this picture. Put that down right now. Don't put that up quite yet. Don't read that. And so, I don't want to tip my hat too quick. And so there's this idea, Paul's like, he goes, hey man, we're all walking in the step of the Spirit. You would think like the next verse would say something like, so now let's all gather and sing Kumbaya together, right? Since you live by the Spirit, let's walk with the Spirit, and now let's celebrate by singing Kumbaya together. You know what verse 26 says? 25, since we live by the Spirit, let us walk by the Spirit. Verse 26 is don't be cocky or conceited or arrogant. Can you imagine people getting really good at religious things and then being arrogant about it and then thinking they're better than other people? I think he knew this was likely to happen. This is like every religious war in the world. Like the next warning is don't let this go to your head. You know, I've been reading the Bible for a long time. One of my disciplines, sometimes what I find is if I'm over familiar with passages, when I get to them, I'll just read past them. I don't know if you ever do this or not. Like, you know, you get to John 3:16, you don't read it because you know it, you just go right past it. So one of my disciplines is I read from other versions of the Bible that sort of disrupt those patterns. And so I want to read this passage out of the Message translation, starting in verse 24. Now we can put it up there. This will be awesome. He says this, since this is the kind of life we have chosen, the life of the Spirit, let us make sure that we do not just hold it as some kind of idea in our heads or a sentiment in our hearts, right? It's not just fodder for social media. But we work its implications out. We work them out in every detail of our lives. That means we will not compare ourselves with each other as if one were better or another worse. We have far more interesting things to do with our lives. Each of us is an original. Then the next section talks about, hey man, if your brothers or sisters are in sin, you got to go dig in with them and get them out. Here's how he writes. Live creatively, friends. If someone falls into the sin, forgivingly restore him, saving your critical comments for yourself because you might be needing forgiveness before the day is out. Stoop down and reach out to those who are oppressed. Share their burdens. Enter into these places. Enter into these places. Let yourself feel what other people feel. This is not easy, nor is it always fun. Share your burdens, or share their burdens, and so complete Christ's law. If you think you're too good for that, you're badly deceived. Verse 4, make a careful exploration of who you are and the work you have been given, and then sink yourself into that. Don't be too impressed with yourself. Now, more than likely, most of us here don't be too impressed with yourselves far more than we heard the first part. Did you hear what it said? It basically says, you have something to offer. I'm not talking about serving in Grow Zone, although that's helpful, or in the parking lot. I'm talking about showing up, what you bring to the world around you, to the relationships that are around you. Make careful exploration of what you bring, right? Do the work, absorb yourself in this, with who you are and the work that you've been given, and then just dive in. Then he says, don't be impressed with yourself. Don't compare yourself with others. Each of you must take responsibility for doing the creative best you can with your own life. I love this next section. Be very sure now, you who have been trained to a self-sufficient maturity. So now everybody has to do a quick assessment. We almost always scale ourselves worse. Self-sufficient maturity doesn't mean you're perfect, doesn't mean you got it all together. It means that somehow the rhythm of your life is like around, hey, I get up, I connect with God, take cues from him, I hear from him, I sense his presence. There's a rhythm and a regularness, a consistency to this. And if you're not there, this isn't like, oh, you're so bad. That's not what it means at all. It's why we need each other. But there are some of you, that's where you are. And what I found in the church world is usually when people get to that place, you know what they start thinking? They're self-sufficient, they're mature. They're like, I need to go deeper. And they usually go, this isn't enough for me, I'm gonna go somewhere else and try to find something deeper. And you don't necessarily find something deeper, you find something new, and it just keeps this cycle going on and on and on. I think a lot of times in our culture, people mistake trivia for depth. And when you get to this place, you don't need to go deeper, you need to give yourself away. When I find depth, you give yourself away. And this is exactly what he's saying, because he says, those of you who you've been trained and you're at this place where you're sensing this, you should enter in to a generous common life with those who've been helpful to you, together sharing all the good things that you haven't experienced. You should now participate in the trajectory of this place. And so this is how I want us to think about this, because when we start to look at our church and what we're saying is begin again, we gather together. So there's something that happens when people connect. There's the space between two human beings when they connect with one another. And there's all sorts of things and ways in which we connect around and connect about, right? You saw this last week. There were lots of people who put on their Tennessee Volunteer hats just because they were Carolina fans who wore orange just because they beat Duke, right? So they connect around this. I saw y'all out there. I saw all of y'all. And so they connect on this. All the Tennessee fans are like, who are you, right? But there's all sorts of reasons we connect. Sometimes it's mutual. We mutually benefit one another. We're good business partners. We're good roommates. We're good study partners. There's a million ways for human beings to connect. We did a whole series on this in January of 21 called Together. But it's learning how to actually find connections, make connections, and let those connections do something. Whenever you start to add more and more people into this mix, something happens with them. It happens all the time, but it gets magnified or multiplied as more and more people sort of enter into this way, this thing. And every sort of act of togetherness has a trajectory. Every time two people come together and have a conversation or connect with one another, there's a trajectory to that. You have two people who are enjoying being together, a third person comes in and asks something about politics, and the conversation goes, what's the trajectory, right? It's off the cliff. And it doesn't take much. There's a trajectory to everything, every connection, every relationship that you are involved in. Boss to employee. There's a trajectory to that. Someone's going to walk away feeling valued or honored, or the opposite. You and your kids, you and your spouse, every connection, you and your friends. Every connection, teacher, student, teacher, everyone has a trajectory, and it has a source. And what we're talking about is when we're together, we want to think about the fact that togetherness leads to something. We call it community. And the way we've defined community, I'm gonna put this on those screens so you can see it. But community is defined, we define it like this, is the relational space. It's this space that exists between two human beings where God's love is exchanged, right? Experienced and expressed, ultimately expressed. So you show up in these places and your job is to bring something, namely to bring God's love so that we exchange this thing that's happening in us with other people. I remember years when we first started the church, we talked about small groups, and small groups are great. We're gonna talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. But we used to say this, we would say life change happens best in small groups. So how many people show up to the church and hoping their life will change, right? That's like everybody. So we say life change happens best in small groups. You want life change, where do you go? Right, small groups, obvious. So you show up at the small group, and guess what you're there to get? Life change. And it doesn't happen. Why? Some of you are like, I don't know the problem. That is the problem. We show up to get. Those of us, all of us, right, have something to give. You show up to give, to bring yourself to something and to take responsibility for the trajectory from which that happens. When we talk about being together, we talk about community. The goal, community is the goal. When we gather together, we want for you to experience community. We want for that to begin to happen. And community only happens as a result of what I would add to this phrase right here, and I call them this is the phrase that I use to remind me, trusted, formative connections. And I have found out that this happens far more easily than I ever imagined. I have a few meetings that I have to tend to that are involved in like getting things going and getting updates on things and knowing things that happen around the church. I'm sitting in meetings and oftentimes it's tactics. It's a lot of things that happen in that you can imagine. But what's been the beautiful part about the last 3 or 4 or 5 years is all of those meetings, even though they are tactical, and even though stuff has to get done, they become these beautiful expressions of community. I mean, I have a very tactical meeting. Clay's sitting over here to my left. Clay's our campus pastor here in Wilmington. And we sit down, and he's organized like I wish I could be. And he has lists, and we go through things, and he'll have a list. I have a list of things, and mine's always like scribbled on a napkin. His is in a spreadsheet, and we talk about it. And he takes my things and puts them in the spreadsheet, so he reminds me that I had them last week. But what's beautiful about this, we've been friends for a long time. But our conversations are about those things, but we also, it bleeds over. How's your walk? What's happening this? What about your family? How you're, all these things. We pray for one another. And every week when I leave, and I've just noticed this, every week when I leave, there's something different in me. It's a sense of, it's that there's a building of trust and a gratitude of, man, I trust this person. And that in that something is shaping, and it's a connection. And what it does is those connections over time build a depth to a relationship that you just can't get any other way. And it's because we're willing to show up every week doing this together. And so when I think about what we're asked to do is to enter into a generous, common life. I want to invite you to show up. To show up. There's a lost art in our culture, and that is the art of commitment, of just being committed to one another. Can you imagine, right, some of you have been at a company for a while or a business job for a while. Can you imagine if every single day, at the end of the day, you were going to find out if you had a job the next day or not based on what you did that day? Every day you come in, at the end of that day, they're going to say, you're either get to come back tomorrow or you're fired. How would that make you feel? Would you be like fired up? No, you're like on pins and needles all the time. But if someone looks at you and says, I believe in you, I think you're the right fit, I think you could be the right person, you're the right teammate, I think all this, they believe in you, they commit to you, how much freedom does that give you? Not to be slack, but to contribute something. In our relationships, right? If in a marriage, if you're always worried, the biblical word is covenant. It's a promise, it's a commitment. When we commit to one another, right? We're willing to endure things together, we're willing to walk with things. And there's also a level of accountability, of course, that comes with that. But this is the idea. And so this is what I'm talking about. When we start to think about this, what I'm asking is just to show up again and again and again and again, and to begin again together. Because something does happen when we're in these rooms together like this. Just as our reach is not a strategy to get our church to grow bigger, attendance is not a measure of our size. We don't use it that way. Our aim isn't to have big attendance. Our aim is to learn how to be together in this space. One of the things that we found, and this is a very important part of our church, and it's not because you get to come and hear good music and hopefully, good preaching or teaching or whatever you think. I mean, we're not indifferent to those things, but that's not the point. You know how many people over 23 years, almost 24 years, have told me, Mike, if I came to your church, the walls would fall down. You know how many people have told me that? You know what they mean, right? They mean my life is such a train wreck. I'm such a terrible person. If I showed up in your church, God would strike it, the walls would fall down, he'd punish me for everybody. And you know how many people who've said that to me have been in this church and the walls are still standing? And I tell them this. I said, you came and the walls didn't fall down. You must not be as bad as you think. Or God is better than you thought. Every week, on Sundays and throughout the week, people walk into these doors wondering if they will be accepted. Wondering if somebody knew what I had done or what I thought or the way that I am. Would they still care about me and accept me? We have people who, some of our unsheltered friends who live in terrible poverty, who show up here often. They're called by name, and they're extended respect and dignity. And you know what that does? Sometimes in every other place, when they stand on the side and they look at the ground, when they walk in here, they look at people's eyes. People see them. Whenever someone sends me an email and tells me something, say, Mike, I've done this, or this is what's happened to me, or can I come to your church even though this? I always invite them. I say, I want you to come down. I want you to say hello to me because I know you've just told me what you've done and I know what you've done and I want to welcome you and that you actually experience the fact someone's going to hug you, shake your hand, say hello to you, even though they know. And it's tangible acceptance. When someone walks in this room, it's tangible acceptance. They recognize. I mean, hopefully you came in here, people were nice to you, right? They're kind, and it's genuine. It's like who we're becoming. And this is a beautiful thing that happens to God's people in this way. The thing that you hear all the time, we say this all the time, when we gather together, right, to be together, we want to learn together, we want to worship together, we want to learn together. We want to worship together, we want to learn together. We want to worship together, we want to learn together. And a lot of people hear that as like, we want to get good music, we want to hear good preaching. It's not what we're doing. We want to worship together, we want to learn together. In worship, and these are practices. And again, the natural thing is to come in and go, hope music's good, right? But we're practicing. We get to come in and we get to stand and we get to confess. We get to confess with our mouths. We get to say, breathe deep and know that he is good. And you get to say those words out loud. You get to be in this place to confess things and to believe things. Sometimes you confess things that you want to believe, but you maybe can't yet. So you're here and you're just saying things, God, I want to believe this, or I hope to believe this. We raise our voices and sometimes we raise our hands and we offer ourselves to God just like we are in this particular place. Sometimes we hear other people singing around us and we can't quite get the words out. And sometimes that's important to let other voices say things for you and you can't muster the words on your own. All right, how many of you maybe I heard this story all the time? People come in here on a Sunday and the music starts and they're crying and they can't figure out why. Right? This is a miracle. I had a guy call me a few years ago. It's probably been 10 years ago. He's a business guy, made a lot of money. He's got a wife, a couple kids. Everything in his life is fine. I think his kids start asking questions about God. He's like, I don't really believe in God. I guess we'll go to church and see if they can give him the answers. So he shows up over here, drops his kids off, comes in the back door. We start the worship music. He starts crying and he bolts out and sits the rest of the service in his car. So he calls me that week and I answer the phone. We talk on the phone. He said, Mike, I'm not an emotional guy. I don't do, I'm successful. I don't really need this. This is for my kids. I come into your church and I start crying. What is that? I said, you're a wimp. I'm just kidding. I didn't say that. I said, that's God. And he goes, you really believe that? I don't know what else to tell you. Like, I don't have a better answer. Like, what else could it be? You know, this is miraculous. This happens every week. And it's not because we're good. It's because God is doing something in us. In us. And we create the trajectory of what happens from here. We learn together. All right, we're not here to confirm what we already believe. We are going to do those things. We're here to learn, to understand what God wants for us. We want to learn more about who God is and how God is and what he's doing in our lives. We want to know him personally. We want him to frame. We want his will and his way to frame the way we see ourselves, the way we see ourselves in the world and the roles that we participate in the world. We don't just learn from me, we learn together, all of us. And my hope is that there will be a trajectory from here. That somehow what happens in this place would create these trusted formative connections that would produce something. That these connections would serve to form us into the kind of community, into a kind of people, a distinct people. And that's not going to be the natural push of most of what you do during the week. So we need to make sure this happens here when we show up in this place. And if you're here and you're not sure what you believe, what we want to do is we want to throw that border on the other side of you and sort of pull you in, because we believe that when you belong here, right, God will do something to allow you to become the kind of person he's created you to become. So that's what we're working on. That's what we want for everybody here. We have to practice this. Every week when you come in here to offer something. In our gathering, we get to practice being distinct. We're not here to consume great content or great music. That's the normal approach. That's what most people are going to normally think. That everything somehow is something that's available for me to take and consume and to use and see how this fits into my own life. Something we can take with us. Not a bad thing. I hope you always find this helpful and practical. But I think there's something else for us, something more for us. That maybe when you show up in here, you come here to give, to receive what God has for you, and then to offer, and to seek to understand the reality that you do belong, and then how it is that we can belong. And to somehow learn how you and I fit together into this whole community. Rather than just taking something with us, we contribute something to us. Because there are people who are walking into these doors, into these places all the time wondering if anybody sees them or knows them or cares about them or loves them. When they walk into this transformative place where God's love is readily exchanged and experienced and ultimately expressed, guess what they encounter when they encounter us? The very love of God for which they have been made. This happens when we commit ourselves to simply be together, right? So guess what? You're here, you've already done it. Isn't that awesome? You've already done it. So yeah, give yourself a hand. You're like, yeah, we did it. We're done. That's all you have to do. Just show up. But we have to gather together and begin again together. Again together. If you're here and you are not connected and you would like to be, we have very easy and very accessible ways for you to do that. We have worked really hard over the last few years to make this church very, very, very personal so we can extend a hand to you and include you and invite you to participate from where you are, and then we'll see what God wants to do from there. So I'm gonna pray for us. And for some of you, you're here and you just showed up. You just showed up. And perhaps the greatest or the best thing you'll do is to show up again next week, and you'll just start a rhythm of being together and recognize that people saw you, said hey to you, that you're accepted, we can help, all those things. Just to begin some patterns that might change the trajectory of your life. Father, would you help us become the kind of people that reflect and represent you well. God, all of us have stuff that we wish we didn't have. All of us have done things we wish we didn't. All of us have had things done to us that we wish weren't. And that scale varies. Some of devastating things. Father, the beauty of your promise is that you take the worst parts and the worst things, and they become fertile soil for beautiful things. Without diminishing the struggle, but rather redeeming it. So God, would you use us to be that kind of people? And then out of that, would you make us into the kind of church that you want for us to be? And I believe this is the kind of church that the world desperately needs. So Father, would you use just our simple act of showing up together as sort of a launching place for this to happen? We trust you, we love you, and we ask you, Father, to do this because I believe this is your hope for us, and you've promised to begin or to finish that which you have started. And we lift all this in of your Son, Jesus, who is our King.